A sex-crazed werewolf, an invisible elf,
a very polite vampire, and a lost heir to the throne.
a knight with a unique past, and a barber with vast experience.
And a very overconfident wizard.
Readers,
Reviewers,
countrymen,
lend us your ears.
that's enough about the brothers Gwynne. Let's talk about the devils.
And a huge thank you to all of our Patreons.
Thank you to the Pit Fighters, the First Swords, and all of the Bright Stars, Truth and Courage.
Hello and welcome today as we are talking about a review, a book, new release, The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. One of the most anticipated reads of 2025 for us and for many of you as well, I am sure. One of the biggest fancy releases of the year.
It is a lot of pages.
It is
now,
really
guys,
big.
if you just quickly take a look at your hands, look in the mirror. If you've turned green, you're green with envy. I'm sorry that we have read The Devils. We've read it already, haven't we?
Yeah, we're pretty lucky.
We are very lucky to have received this arc. It's amazing, and we are very excited to talk about The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. As Will said, probably the biggest fantasy release of the year, although I think Empire of the Dawn might
Catabasis,
be
Empire of the Dawn,
slightly
a few
more
I'd say.
pages. Yeah.
Them four seem to be the top four.
Them four. Joe Abercrombie is probably the biggest of the UK fantasy authors, at the very least. So we're very, very excited to be talking about The Devils today. Obviously, both of us, as you will know, we are both massive First Law fanboys, but I think
We're
this
not
review...
that tall, Ed.
That is true. We're pushing 6 foot with shoes on. We're not. So I think this review is going to be obviously for those people who are interested in Joe Abercrombie's work, but some people might not have tried the First Law yet, or they've dipped into it and they bounced off of it. So hopefully The Devils, this review will sway them into possibly picking this one up.
Well, and we'll talk about the differences between the First Law and the Devils soon, because there are vast differences. If you don't like one, you might like the other. If you like this one, you might not like the First Law. Yeah. But before we get into that, Ed, why don't you give a very quick premise for what the Devils is about?
So we have the Serpent Throne of Troy, we have a long-lost thief, and we have people trying to put that thief onto the throne, and they are taking them over the seas to where Troy is. Now, this is set in kind of like a historical fantasy, medieval Europe-esque world. It does feel historical at times. It does mention in-world things, but it also has lots of fantastical twists, like werewolves who just want to have sex with everyone, basically, and invisible elves.
Yeah, it's like an alternate reality.
It is, yeah. Well, hopefully it will not become a reality, because it's quite scary at times. But that's pretty much the premise. It's about a young girl who's about to be put on the throne. She has a claim to the throne, but she has some family members who are rather against her putting her bum on the seat. So yeah, as it were.
Nicely put, Ed.
Thank you very much.
Joe Abercrombie is known, he's notorious for subverting tropes. And here we see that he's taken that trope of the long lost heir, let's get a band of great warriors around them and send them to get on the throne. There are many classic fantasy series we've read that are like that. He's taking that idea, but then obviously it's Joe Abercrombie. It's not quite going to go to plan, and the characters aren't tropey in themselves. You've got that, as I said, you've got the werewolf, you've got the vampire, you've got this group all together. They're tropey in that sense that they're all very fantastical in one niche way. Yeah. But their actual personality is not.
So I will say that this book is Gunn's Suicide Squad meets Baldur's Gate 3. You have a party put together who are basically the Suicide Squad, aren't they? It is that trope, isn't it? Where you're putting together these bad people, these people with, no hope. They're lost in themselves, basically. Yeah. They've committed some bad things. They're in prison, and they have this one chance to kind of redeem themselves by doing this, like going on this quest, Now, the last quest that we read by Joe Abercrombie was an extremely subverted one. It was, it's basically you have the chosen one. You have lots of tropes rolled into one in the First Law, but they are then subverted, as Will was saying. But here, I mean, for me, Baldur's Gate 3 is one of my favourite games, and it definitely pulls from that. I'm not sure if Joe has actually played Baldur's Gate 3, but it feels like putting that band together. You've got his classic banter, his classic kind of frustrations with each other, which I always love reading from Joe Abercrombie. But obviously The Devils, the writing here is quite different to the First Law, would you say?
Yeah, I was going to say, so both are humorous, both have Joe Abercrombie's sharp prose, but I'd say that they're different in that the First Law is gritty and dark with dark humour in it that makes you laugh out loud. Whereas this gallows humour, yes.
Whereas this very dry humour.
This is much more playful. It is still dry humour, but it is much more playful. The stakes don't quite feel as high in the sense of the characters just in the worst places possible in the first law that you feel so sorry for them.
Yeah.
It's a lot more light-hearted, I'd say, The Devils is, especially compared to The Blade itself, the first book of the First Law series. And the difference is that all the characters are together straight away. And then obviously, might they lose each other? Maybe. Will they find each other again? Maybe. Stuff like that will happen. It's not just they're all together the whole time going from point A to B. There's lots of surprises. Joe Abercrombie has some great action sequences that are just crazy. And I was going to mention Baldur's Gate. I've not really played much of it, but I talked to you about it, watched you play it a bit. And it does remind me of that kind of chaos of just these new forces introduced. And it is so creative. And so I'd say that whilst the First Law feels much grittier and there's not really too much fantasy a lot of the time. This is the complete opposite in that. It's got the same structure in many ways, but it's got the fantasy ramped up to 11, and you've got these extreme characters operating in the mix of that.
Yeah. Now, as a First Law fanboy, I would say the First Law is my favourite fantasy series after The Faith and the Fallen and The Bloodsworn. So I was pretty scared going into this. I kind of put off reading it for a couple of weeks, for a couple of months even, because I was just really afraid that it wasn't going to land for me. And so I am a proper First Law fanboy. The first 100 pages, I would say, it did take me quite a while to get into. It was quite a change of approach, I think, from Joe's standard writing. And the humour is quite, I would say, brash and in your face, whereas I think with the First Law, it's a bit more subtle. And I think there weren't obviously funny in the First Law unless they match your sense of humour. Obviously, there are things that happen in the Devils.
Well, you feel bad for laughing.
Yeah, exactly. There are things in the Devils that feel like this is there to make you laugh. So it's a bit more, there's a bit more purpose, I think, behind the humour, which sometimes, I bounce off of, sometimes I really enjoyed it. So it was kind of a mixture for me. Once I got to kind of the first big scrap, which was about 100 pages in, I was like, okay, that was written brilliantly, and I was definitely invested in the story. I would say I definitely didn't maybe connect to the characters as much as I do with the First Law. And it is that very kind of standard thing of you start in point A, you have a quest, and you've got to get to point B. And it does. There are some kind of shifts along the way, and there are some versions when they get to point B, which are very interesting. But for the most part, it is a travel book, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say it doesn't have the flaws of many travel books where it's just filling in time. It does feel like a stripped way of basically any fat. Everything feels relevant. It hits the beats in a way you kind of expect, but in ways that still surprise you. But you kind of feel, okay, action sequence coming up pretty soon. And then it does, but in a way that surprises you.
Yeah.
I'd say that it is always a little bit risky when you've got a group of characters, all your POV characters are together straight away, and you don't know what they're like separate. There's some rewards you can get from that, high risk, high reward kind of thing. In the First Law, you see all the characters separate and then they meet up, and so you really have a feel for them already, and then I think that makes their interactions really funny from someone else's perspective, because you know what's going on in their head versus what they're showing. Whereas in this, you don't really have that understanding of the characters straight away, and so kind of Joe Abercrombie's humour from that regard is a bit lost. I think we'll have that in book 2 because we know the characters now, but you don't have that from the get-go like you do in the First Law. But it's very sharp, it's very witty, and the fantasy scale, what would you give it out of 10, Ed? How much fantasy is in this book?
There's probably a solid 8, I would say. It's not like epic fantasy, is it?
No.
But there are werewolves, there are elves, there are lots of other things. There are magic from Balthazar, one of the most
Von Chandrazi.
one of the best,
the third
wizards,
most esteemed.
Yeah, exactly. So, and you have a very polite vampire as well. So there are kind of these fantasy elements that come into play. Obviously, the First Law wasn't as fantasy heavy, but there was some magic there. There is some magic here as well. I would say the fantasy is used as kind of a fun point. I think this book, is more fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you feel like this is here to be entertaining, to be fun, which obviously is lots of the point of reading, to be entertained, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, what would you give it on the fantasy scale?
Oh, I think I give it a 10 out of 10, really.
Really?
It's just got everything. You've got a lot in the background.
Do you mean how much I enjoyed it, or how much I would say there is fantasy in there?
There's fantasy in it.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Because you've got all this background, you've got this evil sorceress trying to find where the soul is located, and so she's been experimenting on people, putting animal heads on them, and now they're fused together and they're basically being used as soldiers. Crazy stuff like that. You've got the vampire, you've got the werewolf, you've got the elf, you've got a knight with unique power, all shoved together. I mean, you can't really get more fantasy than that, can you?
No, not at all.
Not really.
I would say Joe Abercrombie always reminds me of Larry McMurtry as a writer. The way that he dips into POVs, dips into people's heads, and then very quickly you have a grasp of that character. I definitely feel like that is the case here as well. And it was probably stronger here than in the first lore because of how the party were all together, that you're able to very quickly dip into a different head. Sort of like there's a scene in Best Served Cold where everyone's sitting around a table, they're having a bit of an argument, and Joe does that where he's dipping into different people. Really great scene. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the Devils, how these people were all together, so you're constantly seeing people through different eyes, seeing people's relationships with different characters in dynamic ways, which was very exciting and really, really fun as well. I think this book does probably remind me the most of Best Served Cold out of all of Joe's books, but probably maybe even before they're hanged with the segment when with Logan and Jazal going into the place. So yeah, we'll say that. So it was very, very fun. Any other things?
I remembered my point. This is like an ensemble piece that all the characters, there isn't really a standout character. In the first lore, each book, for me, I feel like there's one dominant character, and it changes for each book, but there are one or two main characters for each one. Whereas on this, I wouldn't be able to say there's a main character really. There's a most important character, there's a MVP as well, but for the distribution and for what they contribute, I think it's all pretty even.
Yeah, I think page time, screen time is pretty even here, but I would say my favourite character by far was Vigga, the werewolf. She's basically this Norse werewolf who likes to get on top of people, would say. She likes to be, get a leg up, really, doesn't she? On her competition. Head and shoulders above everyone else. So, but I really enjoyed her portrayal. She is a werewolf. And the first time you meet her is probably one of my favourite moments in a book that I've read this year. So that will stick with me for a long time.
I did feel really cinematic.
Yeah, definitely.
And then my favourite is probably Jacob of Thorn. This poor guy, this poor knight, he's just worn down with the past. And he's got his duty. He will do everything he can to fulfil that duty. He's pushing forward. But you just feel sorry for the guy. Yeah. He's just sad, isn't he?
He is a sad man.
But he still pushes on, and you got to admire that.
Yeah, you do admire that. He's a good guy.
But there we go. That is our review of The Devils, which is coming out in early May. We're very lucky to get early access to this, and we thoroughly enjoyed The Devils. Another Joe Abercrombie book ticked. So I've read every single book by Joe Abercrombie.
Nice.
How many books is that now? I don't know. Anyway, I've read everything.
14, 15, something like that.
And then I don't think there's ever a book where I'm really disappointed. And The Devils, it's obviously a big leap. It's a new world. And it's a start for something new for Joe Abercrombie.
Yeah.
And it's a start for something new for us as the readers as well. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where these characters go in the future.
Very nice. So thank you very much for watching. Let us know in the comments below. Have you read the first lore? If you haven't, go and read it. Are you going to be picking up The Devils on release day? Are you going to be lucky enough to see Joe on his American book tour with all of those wonderful authors as well? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to chat with you there. But stay safe. Truth and courage. The Brothers
Gwynne.